You hearing this means that I can't read to you, so I'm really sorry I can't be there. But I have 3 chapters lined up for you. I'm gonna read through all of them, and I really hope that you get a good night's sleep. I love you. Chapter 12. The Patronus. Harry knew that Hermione had meant well, but that didn't stop him from being angry with her. He had been in the owner of the best broom in the world for a few short hours, and now, because of her interference, he didn't know whether he would ever see it again. He was positive that there was nothing wrong with the firebolt now, but what sort of state would it be in once it had been subjected for all sort of anti-jinx tests? Ron was furious with Hermione too. As far as he was concerned, the stripping down of a brand new firebolt was nothing less than criminal damage. Hermione, who remained convinced that she had acted for the best, started avoiding the common room. Harry and Ron supposed she had taken refuge in the library and didn't try to persuade her to come back. All in all, they were glad when the rest of the school returned shortly after New Year, and the Gryffindor Tower became crowded and noisy again. Wood sought Harry out on the night before term started. "Had a good Christmas," he said, and then, without waiting for an answer, he sat down, lowered his voice, and said, "I've been doing some thinking over Christmas, Harry, and after last match, if the Dementors come to the next one, we can't afford you to, well." Wood broke off, looking awkward. "I'm working on it," said Harry quickly. "Professor Lupin said he'll train me to ward off the Dementors. We should be starting this week. He said he'd have time after Christmas." "Oh," said Wood, his expression clearing. "Well, in that case, I didn't really want to lose you as a seeker, Harry. And have you ordered a new broom yet?" "No," said Harry. "What? You'd better get a move on, You can't ride that shooting star against Ravenclaw." "He got a fireball for Christmas," said Ron. "A fireball? No, seriously? A real fireball?" "Don't get excited, Oliver," said Harry gloomily. "I haven't got it anymore. It was confiscated." And he explained all about how the firebolt was now being checked for jinx. "Jinxed? How could it be jinxed?" "Sirius Black," said Harry wearily. "He's supposed to be after me, so McGonagall reckons he might have sent it." Waving aside the information that a famous murderer was after his seeker, Wood said, "But Black couldn't have bought a firebolt. He's on the run. The whole country is looking out for him. How could he just walk into Quality Quidditch Supplies and buy a broomstick?" "I know," said Harry, "but McGonagall still wants to strip it down." Wood went pale. "I'll go and talk to her, Harry," he promised. "I'll make her see a reason. A firebolt. A real firebolt on our team. She wants Gryffindor to win as much as we do. I'll make her see sense. A firebolt." Classes started again the next day. The last thing anyone felt like doing was spending 2 hours in the grounds on a raw January morning, but Hagrid had provided a bonfire full of salamanders for their enjoyment, and they spent an unusually good lesson collecting dry wood and leaves to keep the fire blazing while the flame-loving lizards scampered up and down the crumbling white-hot logs. The first divination lesson was the first divination lesson of the new term was much less fun. Professor Trelawney was now teaching them palmistry, and she lost no time in informing Harry that he had the shortest lifeline she had ever seen. It was defense against the dark arts that Harry was keen to get to. After his conversation with Wood, he wanted to get started on his anti-Dementor lessons as soon as possible. "Ah, yes," said Lupin, when Harry reminded him of his promise at the end of class. "Let me see. How about 8 o'clock on Thursday evening? The History of Magic classroom should be large enough. I'll have to think carefully about how we're going to do this. We can't bring a real Dementor into the castle to practice on." "Still looks ill, doesn't he?" said Ron as they walked down the corridor heading to dinner. "What do you reckon's the matter with him?" There was a loud and impatient tuff from behind them. It was Hermione, who had been sitting at the feet of the suit of armor, repacking her bag, which was so full of books it wouldn't close. "And what are you tutting us for?" said Ron irritably. "Nothing." Hermione left in Hermione oh my god, said Hermione in a lofty voice, heaving her bag over her shoulder. "Yes, you were. I said, I wonder what's wrong with Lupin. And you, well, isn't it obvious?" said Hermione with a look of maddening superiority. If you don't want to tell us, then don't," snapped Ron. "Fine," said Hermione hotly, and she marched off. "She doesn't know," said Ron, staring resentfully after Hermione. "She's just trying to get us to talk to her again." At 8 o'clock on Thursday evening, Harry left Gryffindor Tower for the History of Magic classroom. It was dark and empty when he arrived, but he lit the lamp with his wand and waited only 5 minutes when Professor Lupin turned up, carrying a large packing case, which he heaved onto Professor Bin's desk. "What's that?" said Harry. "Another boggart," said Lupin, stripping off his cloak. "I've been combing the castle ever since Tuesday, and very luckily, I found this one lurking inside Mr. Filch's cabinet. It's the nearest thing we'll get to a real Dementor. The boggart will turn into a Dementor when he sees you, so we'll be able to practice on him. I can store him in my office when we're not using him. There's a cupboard under my desk he'll like." "Okay," said Harry, trying to sound as though he wasn't apprehensive at all, and merely glad that Lupin had found such a good substitute for a real Dementor. So, Professor Lupin had taken out his own wand and indicated that Harry should do the same. "The spell I'm going to try and teach you is highly advanced magic, Harry. Well beyond ordinary wizarding level. It's called the Patronus Charm." "How does it work?" said Harry nervously. "Well, when it works correctly, it conjures up a Patronus," said Lupin, "which is a kind of anti-Dementor, a guardian that acts as a shield between you and the Dementor." Harry had a sudden vision of himself crouching behind a Hagrid-sized figure holding a large club. Professor Lupin continued, "The Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementors feeds upon. Hope, happiness, and desire to survive. But it cannot feel despair, as real humans can, so the Dementors can't hurt it. But I must warn you, Harry, that the charm might be too advanced for you. Many qualified wizards have difficulty with it." "What does a Patronus look like?" said Harry curiously. "Each one is unique to the wizard who conjures it." "And how do you conjure it?" "With an incantation, which will only work if you are concentrating with all your might on a single very happy memory." Harry cast his mind for about a happy memory. Certainly nothing that had happened to him at the Dursleys was going to do. Finally, he settled on the moment he had first ridden a broomstick. "Right," he said, trying to recall as exactly as possible the wonderful soaring sensation of his stomach. "The incantation is," Lupin cleared his throat, "Expecto Patronum." "Expecto Patronum," Harry repeated under his breath. "Expecto Patronum." "Concentrating hard on your happy memory?" "Oh, yeah," said Harry, quickly forcing his thoughts back to that first broom ride. Expecto Patronum. Expecto Patronum. Something whooshed suddenly out of the end of his wand. It looked like wisps of silvery gas. "Did you see that?" said Harry excitedly. "Something happened." "Very good," Lupin said, smiling. "Right then, ready to try it on a Dementor?" "Yes," said Harry, gripping his wand very tightly and moving into the middle of the deserted classroom. He tried to keep his mind on flying, but something else kept intruding. Any second now, he might hear his mother again. But he shouldn't think that, or he would hear her again, and he didn't want to. Or did he? Lupin grasped the lid of the packing case and pulled. The Dementor rose slowly from the box, its hooded face turned toward Harry, one glistening, scabbed hand gripping its cloak. The lamps around the classroom flickered and went out. The Dementor stepped from the box and started to sweep silently toward Harry, drawing a deep, rattling breath. A wave of piercing cold broke over him. "Expecto Patronum," Harry yelled. "Expecto Patronum." Expecto, but the classroom and the Dementor were dissolving. Harry was falling again through thick white fog, and his mother's voice was louder than ever, echoing inside his head. Not Harry, not Harry, please, I'll do anything. Stand aside, silly girl. Harry. Harry jerked back to life. He was flying flat on his back on the floor. The classroom lamps were alight again. He didn't have to ask what happened. Sorry, he muttered, sitting up and feeling cold sweat tickling down behind his glasses. Are you all right? Yes. Harry pulled himself up on one of the desks and leaned against it. Here, Lupin handed him a chocolate frog. Eat this before we try again. I didn't expect you to do it on your first time. In fact, I would have been astounded if you had. It's getting worse, Harry muttered, biting off the frog's head. I could hear her louder that time. And him, Voldemort. Lupin looked paler than usual. Harry, if you don't want to continue, I will more than understand. I do, said Harry fiercely, stuffing the rest of the chocolate frog into his mouth. I've got to. What if the Dementors turn up at our match against Ravenclaw? I can't afford to fall off again. If we lose this game, we've lost the Quidditch Cup. All right then, said Lupin. You might want to select another memory, a happy memory, to concentrate on. That one doesn't seem to be strong enough. Harry thought hard and decided his feelings when Gryffindor had won the house championship last year had definitely qualified as happy. He ripped his wand tightly again and took up his position in the middle of the classroom. Harry. Ready? Said Lupin, gripping the box lid. Ready, said Harry, trying to fill his head with happy thoughts about Gryffindor winning and not dark thoughts about what was going to happen when the box opened. Go, said Lupin, pulling off the lid. The room went icily cold and dark once more. The Dementor glided forward, drawing its breath. One rotting hand was extending toward Harry. Expecto Patronum, Harry yelled. Expecto Patronum. Expecto... White fog obscured his senses. Big blurred shapes were moving around him. Then came a new voice, a man's voice, shouting, Lily, take Harry and go. It's him. Go, run. I'll hold him off. The sounds of someone stumbling from a room, a door bursting open, a cackle of high-pitched laughter. Harry, wake up. Lupin was tapping Harry hard on the face. This time it was a minute before Harry understood why he was laying on a dusty classroom floor. I heard my dad, Harry mumbled. That's the first time I've ever heard him. He tried to take on Voldemort himself to give my mom time to run for it. Harry suddenly realized that there were tears on his face, mingling with the sweat. He bent his face as low as possible, wiping them off on his robes, pretending to do up his shoelace so that Lupin wouldn't see. You heard James? Said Lupin in a strange voice. Yeah, face dry, Harry looked up. Why, you didn't know my dad, did you? I did, as a matter of fact, said Lupin. We were friends at Hogwarts. Listen, Harry, perhaps we should leave it here for tonight. This charm is ridiculously advanced. I shouldn't have suggested putting you through this. No, said Harry. He got up again. I'll have one more go. I'm not thinking of happy enough things. That's what it is. Hang on. He racked his brains, a really, really happy memory. One that he could turn into a good, strong Patronus. The moment when he first found out he was a wizard, and he would be leaving the Dursleys for Hogwarts. If that wasn't a happy memory, he didn't know what was. Concentrating very hard on how he had felt when he realized he'd be leaving Privet Drive, Harry got to his feet and faced the packing case once more. Ready? Said Lupin. He looked as though he were doing this against his better judgment. Concentrating hard? All right, go. He pulled off the lid of the case for the third time and the Dementor rose out of it. The room felt cold and dark. Expecto Patronum, Harry bellowed. Expecto Patronum. Expecto Patronum. The screaming inside Harry's head started again, except this time it sounded as though it were coming from a badly tuned radio, softer and louder and softer again. He could still see the Dementor. It had halted. Then and then a huge silver shadow came bursting out the end of Harry's wand to hover between him and the Dementor. And though Harry's legs felt like water, he was still on his feet. Though for how much longer, he wasn't sure. Ridiculous, roared Lupin, springing forward. There was a loud crack, and Harry's cloudy Patronus vanished. Along with the Dementor, he sank into a chair, feeling as exhausted as if he'd just run a mile. And he felt his legs were shaking. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Professor Lupin forcing the boggart back into the packaging case with his wand. It had turned into a silvery orb again. Excellent, Lupin said, striding over to where Harry sat. Excellent, Harry. There was definitely a start. Can we have another go? Just one more. Not now, said Lupin firmly. You've had enough for one night. Here. Harry handed Harry a large bar of Honeyduke's best chocolate. Eat a lot, or Madame Pomfrey will be after my blood. Same time next week? Okay, said Harry. He took a bite off the chocolate and watched Lupin extinguishing the lamps that had rekindled with the disappearance of the Dementor. A thought had just occurred to him. Professor Lupin, he said, if you knew my dad, you must have known Sirius Black as well. Lupin turned very quickly. What gives you that idea? He said sharply. Nothing. I just knew they were friends at Hogwarts too. Lupin's face relaxed. Yes, I knew him, he said shortly. Or I thought I did. You'd better be off, Harry. It's getting late. Harry left the classroom, walking along the corridor and around the corner, then took a detour behind a suit of armor and sank down on its plinth to finish his chocolate, wishing he hadn't mentioned Black, as Lupin was obviously not keen on the subject. Then Harry's thoughts wandered back to his mother and father. He felt drained and strangely empty, even though he was so full of chocolate. Terrible though it was to hear his parents' last moments replayed inside his head, these were the only times Harry had heard their voices since he was very small. But he'd never been able to produce a proper Patronus if he half wanted to hear his parents again. They're dead, he told himself sternly. They're dead, and listening to echoes of them won't bring them back. You better get a grip on yourself if you want the Quidditch Cup. He stood up, crammed the last bite of chocolate in his mouth, and headed back to Gryffindor Tower. Ravenclaw played Slytherin a week after start of term. Slytherin won, though narrowly. According to Wood, this was good news for Gryffindor, who would take second place if they beat Ravenclaw too. He therefore increased the number of team practices to 5 a week. This meant that with Lupin's anti-Dementor classes, which in themselves were more draining than 6 Quidditch practice, Harry had just 1 night a week to do all his homework. Even so, he wasn't showing the strain nearly as much as Hermione, whose immense workload finally seemed to be getting to her. Every night, without fail, Hermione was to be seen in a corner of the common room, several tables spread with books, arithmancy charts, ruined dictionaries, diagrams of muggles lifting heavy objects, and file upon file of extensive notes. She barely spoke to anybody and snapped when she was interrupted. How's she doing it? Ron muttered. One evening, as Harry sat finishing a nasty essay on undetectable poisons for Snape, Harry looked up. Hermione was barely visible behind a tottering pile of books. Doing what? Getting to all her classes. I heard her talking to Professor Victor, that arithmancy witch, this morning. They were going on about yesterday's lesson, but Hermione can't have been there, because she was with us in care of magical creatures. And Ernie Macmillan told me she's never missed a Muggle Studies class, but half of them are at the same time as divination, and she's never missed one of them either. Harry didn't have time to fathom the mystery of Hermione's impossible schedule at the moment. He really needed to get on with Snape's essay. 2 seconds later, however, he was interrupted again, this time by Wood. Bad news, Harry. I've just been to see Professor McGonagall about the firebolt. She, got a bit shirty with me. Told me I'd got my priorities wrong. Seemed to think I cared more about winning the cup than I do about you staying alive. Just because I told her I didn't care if it threw you off, as long as you caught the snitch first. Wood shook his head in disbelief. Honestly, the way she was yelling at me, you'd think I said something terrible. Then I asked her how much longer she was going to keep it. He screwed up his face and imitated Professor McGonagall. As long as necessary, Wood. I reckon it's time you ordered a new broom, Harry. There's an order for him at the back of which broomstick. You could get a Nimbus 2001, like Malfoy's got. I'm not buying anything Malfoy thinks is good, said Harry flatly. January faded imperceptibly, into February, with no change in the bitterly cold weather. The match against Ravenclaw was drawing nearer and nearer, but Harry still hadn't ordered a new broom. He was now asking Professor McGonagall for news of the firebolt after Transfiguration lessons, Ron standing hopefully at his shoulder, Hermione rushing past with her face averted. No, Potter, you can't have it back yet. Professor McGonagall told him the 12th time this happened before he'd even opened his mouth. We've checked for most of the usual curses, but Professor Flitwick believes the broom might be carrying a hurling hex. I shall tell you once we've finished checking it. Now please, stop badgering me. To make matters worse, Harry's anti-dementia lessons were not going nearly as well as he'd hoped. Several sessions on, he was able to produce an indistinct silvery shadow every time the Booker Dementor approached him, but his Patronus was too feeble to drive the Dementor away. All it did was hover, like a semi-transparent cloud, draining Harry of energy as he fought to keep it there. Harry felt angry with himself, guilty about his secret desire to hear his parents' voice again. You're expecting too much of yourself, said Professor Lupin sternly on their 4th week practice. For a 13-year-old wizard, even an indistinct Patronus is a huge achievement. You aren't passing out anymore, are you? I thought a Patronus would charge the Dementors down or something, said Harry dispiritedly. My goodness. Make them disappear. The true Patronus does do that, said Lupin, but you've achieved a great deal in a very short pace of time. The Dementors put in an appearance at your next Quidditch match. You will be able to keep them at bay long enough to get back to the ground. You said it's harder if there are loads of them, said Harry. I have complete confidence in you, said Lupin, smiling. Here, you've earned a drink. Something from the 3 broomsticks. You won't have tried it before. He pulled 2 bottles out of his briefcase. Butterbeer, said Harry without thinking. Yeah, I like that stuff. Lupin raised an eyebrow. Oh, Ron and Hermione brought me some back from Hogsmeade, Harry lied quickly. I see, said Lupin, though he still looked slightly suspicious. Well, let's drink to a Gryffindor victory against Ravenclaw. Not that I'm supposed to take side as a teacher, he added hastily. They drank the butterbeer in silence until Harry voiced something he'd been wondering. What's under the Dementor's hood? Professor Lupin lowered his bottle thoughtfully. Well, the only people who really know are in no condition to tell us. You see, the Dementor lowers its hood only to use its last and worst weapon. What is that? They call it the Dementor's kiss, said Lupin with a slightly twisted smile. It's what Dementors do to those they wished to destroy utterly. I suppose there must be some kind of mouth under there, because they clamp their jaws upon the mouth of the victim, and they suck out its soul. Harry accidentally spat out a bit of butterbeer. What, they kill? Oh, no, said Lupin. Much worse than that. You can exist without your soul, you know, as long as your brain and heart are still working. But you'll have no sense of self anymore. No memory, no anything. There's no chance at all of recovery. You'll just exist as an empty shell. And your soul is gone forever. Lost. Lupin drank a little more butterbeer and then said, It's fate that awaits Sirius Black. It was in the Daily Prophet this morning. The Ministry have given the Dementors permission to perform it if they find him. Harry sat stunned for a moment at the idea of someone having their soul sucked out through their mouth. But then he thought of Black. He deserves it, he said suddenly. You think so? Said Lupin lightly. Do you really think anyone deserves that? Yes, said Harry defiantly. For some things. He would have liked to have told Lupin about the conversation he'd overheard about Black and the Three Bloomsticks. About Black betraying his mother and father, but it would have involved revealing that he'd gone to Hogsmeade without permission, and he knew Lupin wouldn't be very impressed by that. So he finished his butterbeer, thanked Lupin, and left the History of Magic's classroom. Harry half wished that he hadn't asked what was under a Dementor's head. The answer had been so horrible, and he was so lost in an unpleasant thought of what it would feel like to have your soul sucked out of you that he walked headlong into Professor McGonagall halfway up the stairs. Do watch where you're going, Potter. Sorry, Professor. I've just been looking for you in Gryffindor common room. Well, here it is. We've done everything we could think of, and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it at all. You've got a very good friend somewhere, Potter. Harry's jaw dropped. She was holding out his firebolt, and it looked as magnificent as ever. I can have it back, Harry said, weakly. Seriously, said Professor McGonagall. She was actually smiling. I dare say you'll need to get the feel of it before Saturday's match, won't you? And Potter, do try and win, won't you? Or we'll be out of the running for 8th year in a row, as Professor Snape was kind enough to remind me only last night. Speechless, Harry carried the firebolt back upstairs, toward Gryffindor Tower. As he turned round the corner, he saw Ron dashing up toward him, grinning from ear to ear. She gave it to you? Excellent. Listen. Can I still have a go on it? Tomorrow. Yeah, anything, said Harry, his heart lighter than it had been in a month. You know what? We should make up with Hermione. She was only trying to help. Yeah, all right, said Ron. She's in the common room now, working for a change. They turned into the corridor to Gryffindor Tower and saw Neville Longbottom pleading with Sir Cadogan, who seemed to be refusing him entrance. I wrote them down, Neville was saying tearfully, but I must have dropped them somewhere. A likely tale, word Sir Cadogan, then spotting Harry and Ron. Good evening, my fine young yeoman. Come clap this loon in irons. He is trying to force entry to the chambers within. Oh, shut up, said Ron as he and Harry drew level with Neville. I've lost the passwords, Neville told them miserably. I made him tell me what passwords he was going to use this week, because he keeps changing them, and now I don't know what I've done with them. Odds but Dickens, said Harry to Sir Cadogan, who looked extremely disappointed and reluctantly slunk forward to let them into the common room. There was a sudden excited murmur as every head turned, and the next moment, Harry was surrounded by people exclaiming over his firebolt. Where did you get it, Harry? Will you let me have a go? Have you written it yet, Harry? Ravenclaw will have no chance. They're all on clean sweep 7s. Can I just hold it, Harry? After 10 minutes or so, during which the firebolt was passed around and admired from every angle. The crowd dispersed, and Harry and Ron had a clear view of Hermione, and the only person who hadn't rushed over to them bent over her work and carefully avoided their eyes. Harry and Ron approached her table, and at last she looked up. "I got it back," said Harry, grinning at her and holding up the firebolt. "See, Hermione, there wasn't anything wrong with it," said Ron. "Well, there might have been," said Hermione. "I mean, at least you know now it's safe." "Yeah, I suppose so. I'd better put it upstairs." "I'll take it," said Ron eagerly. "I've got to give Scabbers his rat tonic." He took the firebolt and holding it as if it were made of glass, he carried it away up to the boys' staircase. "Can I sit down then?" Harry asked Hermione. "I suppose so," Hermione said, moving a great stack of parchment off a chair. Harry looked around at the cluttered table, at a long arithmancy essay on which the ink was still glistening, at the even longer Muggle Studies essay. "Explain why Muggles need electricity." And at the rune translation Hermione was now poring over. "How are you getting through all this stuff?" Harry asked her. "Oh, well, working so hard," said Hermione. Close up, Harry saw that she looked almost as tired as Lupin. "Why don't you just drop a couple of subjects?" Harry asked, watching her lift her books as she searched for her rune dictionary. "I couldn't do that," said Hermione, looking scandalized. "Arithmancy looks terrible," said Harry, picking up a very complicated-looking number chart. "Oh no, it's wonderful," said Hermione earnestly. "It's my favorite subject." But exactly what was wonderful about arithmancy, Harry never found out. At that precise moment, a strangled yell echoed down the boys' staircase. The whole common room fell silent, staring petrified at the entrance. Then came hurried footsteps, growing louder and louder. And then Ron came leaping into view, dragging with him a bedsheet. "Look," he bellowed, striding over to Hermione's table. "Look!" he yelled, shaking the bedsheets in her face. "Scabbers! Look at Scabbers!" Hermione was leaning away from Ron, looking utterly bewildered. Harry looked down at the sheet Ron was holding. There was something red on it. Something that looked horribly like blood, Ron yelled into the stunned silence. "He's gone. And you know what was on the floor?" "No," said Hermione in a trembling voice. Ron threw something down onto Hermione's rune translation. Hermione and Ron leaned forward. Lying on top of the weird silky shapes were several long, ginger-haired cats. Chapter 13. Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. It looked like the end of Ron and Hermione's friendship. Each was so angry with the other that Harry couldn't see how they'd ever make up. Ron was enraged that Hermione had never taken Crookshank's attempts to eat Scabbers seriously, hadn't bothered to keep a close watch on him, and was still trying to pretend that Crookshanks was innocent by suggesting that Ron look for Scabbers under all the boys' beds. Hermione, meanwhile, maintained fiercely that Ron had no proof Crookshanks had eaten Scabbers, that the ginger-haired cats might have been there since Christmas, and that Ron had been prejudiced against her cat ever since Crookshanks had landed on Ron's head in the magical menagerie. Personally, Harry was sure that Crookshanks had eaten Scabbers, and when he tried to point out to Hermione that the evidence all pointed that way, she lost her temper with Harry too. "Okay, side with Ron. I knew you would," she said shrilly. "First the firebolt, now Scabbers. Everything's my fault, isn't it? Just leave me alone, Harry. I've got a lot of work to do." Ron had taken the loss of his rat very hard indeed. "Come on, Ron. You were always saying how boring Scabbers was," said Fred bracingly. "And he's been off color for ages. He was wasting away. It was probably better for him to snuff it quickly. One swallow. Probably didn't feel a thing." "Fred," Ginny said indignantly. "All he did was eat and sleep, Ron. You said it yourself." "He bit Goyle for us once," Ron said miserably. "Remember, Harry?" "That's true," said Harry. "His finest hour," said Fred, unable to keep a straight face. "Let the scar on Goyle's finger stand as lasting tribute to his memory." "Oh, come on, Ron. Get yourself down to Hogsmeade and buy a new rat. What's the point of moaning?" In a last-ditch attempt to cheer Ron up, Harry persuaded him to come along to the Gryffindor's team final practice before the Ravenclaw match, so that he could have a ride on the firebolt after they finished. This did seem to take Ron's mind off of Scabbers for a moment. "Great, can I try to shoot a few goals on it?" So they set off for the Quidditch field together. Madam Hooch, who was still overseeing Gryffindor practices to keep an eye on Harry, was just as impressed with the firebolt as everyone else had been. She took it in her hands before takeoff and gave them the benefit of her professional opinion. Look at the balance on it. If the Nimbus series has a fault, it's a slight list in the tail. You often find they develop a drag after a few years. They've updated the handle too, a bit slimmer than the clean sweepers. Reminded me of the old silver arrows. A pity they've stopped making them. I learned to fly on one. And a very fine old broom it was too. She continued on this vein for some time until Wood said, Madam Hooch, is it okay if Harry has the firebolt back? We need to practice." "Oh, right, here you are then, Potter," said Madam Hooch. "I'll sit over here with Weasley." She and Ron left the field to sit at the stadium, and the Gryffindor team gathered around Wood for his final instructions for tomorrow's match. "Harry, I've just found out who Ravenclaw is playing as Seeker. It's Cho Chang. She's a 4th year, and she's pretty good. I really hoped she wouldn't be fit, if she had some problems with injuries." Wood scowled his displeasure that Cho Chang had made a full recovery, when said, "On the other hand, she rides a Comet 260, which is going to look like a joke next to the firebolt." He gave Harry's broom a look of fervent admiration and then said, "Okay, everyone, let's go." And at long last, Harry mounted his firebolt and kicked off from the ground. It was better than he'd ever dreamed. The firebolt turned with the slightest touch. It seemed to obey his thoughts rather than his grip. It sped across the field at such speed that the stadium turned into a green and gray blur. Harry turned it sharply that Alicia Spinner screamed, then went to a perfectly controlled dive, brushing the grassy field with his toes, before rising 30, 40, 50 feet into the air again. "Harry, I'm letting the snitch out," Wood called. Harry turned and raised the bludger toward the goalpost. He outstretched it easily, saw the snitch dart from behind Wood, and within 10 seconds had caught it tightly in his hand. The team cheered madly. Harry let the snitch go again, gave it a minute's head start, before it tore after it, weaving in and out of the others. He spotted it lurking near Katie Bell's knee, looped her easily, and caught it again. It was the best practice ever. The team, inspired by the presence of the firebolt in their midst, performed their best moves faultlessly, and by the time they hit the ground again, Wood didn't have a single criticism to make, which, as George Weasley pointed out, was a first. "Can't see what's going to stop us tomorrow," said Wood. "Not unless... Harry, you've sorted out your Dementor problem, haven't you?" "Yeah," said Harry, thinking of his feeble Patronus and wishing it were stronger. "The Dementors won't turn up again, Oliver. Dumbledore'd go ballistic," Fred said confidently. "Well, let's hope not," said Wood. "Anyway, good work, everyone. Let's get back to the tower. Turn in early. I'm staying out for a bit. Ron wants to go on the firebolt," Harry told Wood, and while the rest of the team headed off to their locker rooms, Harry strode over to Ron, who vaulted the barrier to the stands and came to meet him. Madam Hooch had fallen asleep in her seat. "There you go," said Harry, handing Ron the fireball. Ron, an expression of ecstasy on his face, mounted the broom and zoomed off into the gathering darkness while Harry walked around the edges of the field, watching him. Night had fallen before Madam Hooch awoke with a start, told Harry and Ron off for not waking her, and insisted that they go back to the castle. Harry shouldered the firebolt, and he and Ron walked off to the shadowy stadium, discussing the firebolt's superbly smooth action, its phenomenal acceleration, and its pinpoint turning. They were halfway toward the castle when Harry, glancing to his left, saw something that made his heart turn over, a pair of eyes gleaming out of the darkness. Harry stopped dead, his heart banging against his ribs. "What's the matter?" said Ron. Harry pointed. Ron pulled out his wand and murmured, "Lumos." A beam of light fell across the grass, hit the bottom of a tree, and illuminated its branches. There, crouching among the budding leaves, was Crookshanks. "Get out of there," Ron roared, and he stooped down and seized the stone lying in the grass. But before he could do anything else, Crookshanks had vanished with one swish of his long ginger tail. "See?" said Ron furiously, chucking the stone again. "She's still letting him wander about whenever he wants, probably washing down Scabbers with a couple of birds now." Harry didn't say anything, took a deep breath as relief stepped through him. He had been sure for a moment that those eyes had belonged to the Grim. They set off for the castle once more. Slightly ashamed of his moment of panic, Harry didn't say anything to Ron, nor did he look left or right until they reached the well-lit entrance hall. Harry went down to breakfast the next morning with the rest of the boys in his dormitory, all of whom seemed to think the firebolt deserved a sort of guard of honor. As Harry entered the great hall, heads turned in the direction of the firebolt, and there was a great deal of excited muttering. Harry saw, with enormous satisfaction, that the Slytherin team were all looking thunderstruck. "Did you see his face?" said Ron gleefully, looking back at Malfoy. "He can't believe it. This is brilliant." Wood, too, was basking in the reflected glory of the firebolt. "Put it here, Harry," he said, laying the broom in the middle of the table and carefully turning it so that its name faced upward. People from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff's tables were soon coming over to look. Cedric Diggory came over to congratulate Harry on having acquired such a superb replacement for his Nimbus, and Percy's Ravenclaw girlfriend, Penelope Clearwater, asked if she could actually hold the firebolt. Now, Penny, no sabotage," said Percy hurriedly as she examined the firebolt closely. "Penelope and I have got a bet on," he told the team. 10 galleons on the occurrence of the match. Penelope put the firebolt down again, thanked Harry, and went back to her table. "Harry, make sure you win," said Percy with an urgent whisper. "I haven't got 10 galleons." "Yes, I'm coming, Penny." Then he bustled off to join her in a piece of toast. "Sure you can manage that broom, Potter," said a cold, drawling voice. Malfoy had arrived for a closer look, grabbing Will right behind him. "Yeah, I reckon so," said Harry casually. "Got plenty of special features, hasn't it?" said Malfoy, glittering maliciously. "Shame it doesn't come with a parachute, in case you go too near Dementor." Grabbing Goyle sniggered. "Pity you can't attach an extra arm to yours." Malfoy's... "Whoa," said Harry. "Then it could catch the snitch for you." The Gryffindor team laughed loudly. Malfoy's pale eyes narrowed. Then he stalked away. They watched him rejoin the rest of the Slytherin team, who put their heads together, no doubt asking Malfoy whether Harry's broom was really a firebolt. At 11:15, the Gryffindor team set off on the locker rooms. The weather couldn't have been more different from their match against Hufflepuff. It was a clear, cool day with a very light breeze. There would be no visibility problems this time, and Harry, though nervous, was starting to feel the excitement only a Quidditch match could bring. They could hear the rest of the school moving in the stadium beyond. Harry took off his black school robes, removed his wand from his pocket, and stuck it inside the t-shirt he was going to wear under his Quidditch robes. Then, he hoped he wouldn't need it. He wondered sullenly whether Professor Lupin was in the crowd, watching. "You know what we've got to do," said Wood as they prepared to leave the locker rooms. If we lose this match, we're out of the running. Just fly like you did in practice yesterday, and we'll be okay. They walked out onto the field to tumultuous applause. The Ravenclaw team, dressed in blue, were already standing in the middle of the field. Their seeker, Cho Chang, was the only girl on their team. She was shorter than Harry and by about a head, and Harry couldn't help but noticing how nervous he was. She was extremely pretty. She smiled at Harry as the teams faced each other behind their captains, and he felt a slight lurch in the region of his stomach that he didn't think it had anything to do with nerves. Wood, Davies, shake hand, Madame Hooch said briskly. Then Wood shook hands with the Ravenclaw captain. Mount your brooms. On my whistle. 3, 2, 1. Harry kicked off the broom into the air, and the firebolt zooped higher and faster than any other broom. He soared around the stadium and began squinting around for the snitch, listening all the while to the commentary, which was being provided by the Weasley twins' friend Lee Jordan. They're off, and the big excitement this match is the firebolt that Harry Potter is flying for Gryffindor. According to Witch Broomstick, the firebolt's going to be the broom of choice for the national teams this year for the World Championship. Jordan, would you mind telling us what's going on in the match? Interrupted McGonagall's voice. Right you are, Professor. Just giving a bit of background. The firebolt incidentally has an inbuilt auto brake and Jordan. Okay. Gryffindor in possession. Katie Bell of Gryffindor heading for goal. Harry streaked past Katie in the opposite direction, gazing around for a glint of gold and noticing that Cho Chang was tailing him closely. She was undoubtedly a very good flyer. She kept cutting across him, forcing him to change direction. Show her your acceleration, Harry, Fred yelled as he whooshed past in pursuit of a bludger that was aiming for Alicia. Harry urged the firebolt forward as they rounded the Ravenclaw's goalpost. Cho Chang fell behind, just as Katie succeeded in scoring the first goal of the match, and the Gryffindor end of the field went wild. He saw it. The snitch was close to the ground, flitting near one of the barriers. Harry dived. Cho saw what he was doing and tore after him. Harry was speeding up, excitement flooding him. Dives were his specialty. He was 10 feet away. Then a bludger hit one of the Ravenclaw beaters, came pelting out of nowhere. Harry veered off course, avoiding it by an inch. And then, in those few crucial seconds, the snitch had vanished. There was a great awe of disappointment from the Gryffindor supporters, but much applause from their Peter from the Ravenclaw end. George Weasley vented his feelings by hitting the second bludger directly at the offending beater, who was forced to roll over in midair to avoid it. Gryffindor leads by 80 points to 0. And look at the firebolt go. Potter's really putting it through the paces now. See it turn. Chang's comet is no match for it. The firebolt's precision balance is really noticeably in this long. Jordan, are you being paid to advertise firebolts? Get on with the commentary. Ravenclaw was pulling back. They had now scored 3 goals, which put Gryffindor at only 50 points a hit. If Cho got the snitch before him, Ravenclaw would win. Harry dropped lower, narrowly avoiding the Ravenclaw chaser, scanning the field frantically. A glint of gold, a flutter of tiny wings. The snitch was circling the Gryffindor goalpost. Harry accelerated, eyes fixed on the speck of gold ahead, but just then Cho appeared out of thin air, blocking him. Harry, this is no time to be a gentleman, Wood roared as Harry swerved to avoid a collision. Knock her off her broom if you have to. Harry turned and caught sight of Cho. She was grinning. The snitch had vanished again. Harry turned his firebolt upward, and was soon 20 feet above the game. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Cho following him. She decided to mark him rather than search for the snitch herself. All right then. If she wanted to tail him, she'd have to take the consequences. He dived again, and Cho, thinking he'd seen the snitch, tried to follow. Harry pulled out of the dive very sharply. She hurtled downward. He rose fast as a bullet once more, and then saw it. For the third time, the snitch was glittering way above the field, and Ravenclaw end. He accelerated. So many feet below did Cho. He was winning, gaining on the snitch with every second, and then, oh, screamed Cho, pointing. Distracted, Harry looked down. 3 Dementors, 3 tall black hooded Dementors, were looking up at him. Harry didn't stop to think, plunging a hand down the neck of his robes and whipped his wand and roared, Expecto Patronum. Some silver-white something enormous erupted from the end of his wand. He knew it shot directly at the Dementors, but didn't pause to watch. His mind still miraculously clear, he looked ahead. He was nearly there, stretched out his hand, still grasping his wand, and just managed to close his fingers over the small, struggling snitch. Madame Hooch's whistle sounded. Harry turned around in mid-air and saw 6 scarlet blurs bearing down on him. Next moment, the whole team was hugging him so hard he was nearly pulled off his broom. Down below, he could hear the roars of the Gryffindor's crowd. That's my boy, Wood kept yelling. Alicia, Angelina, and Katie had all kissed Harry. Fred had him in a grip so tight Harry felt as though his head would come off. In complete disarray, the team managed to make its way back up to the ground. Harry got off his broom and looked up to see a gaggle of Gryffindor supporters sprinting onto the field. Ron in the lead. Before he knew it, he had been engulfed by the cheering crowd. Yes, Ron yelled, yanking Harry's arm into the air. Yes, yes, well done, Harry, said Percy, looking delighted. 10 galleons to me. Must find Penelope, excuse me. Good for you, Harry, roared Seamus Finnegan. Ready, brilliant, boomed Hagrid over the heads of the miling Gryffindors. That was quite some Patronus, said a voice in Harry's ear. Harry turned around to see Professor Lupin, who looked both shaken and pleased. The Dementors didn't affect me at all, Harry said excitedly. I didn't feel a thing. That's because they, weren't Dementors, said Professor Lupin. Come and see. He led Harry out of the crowd until they were able to see the edge of the field. You gave Mr. Malfoy quite a fright, said Lupin. Harry stared. Lying in a crumpled heap on the ground were Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, and Marcus Flint, Slytherin team captain, all struggling to remove themselves from long, black hooded robes. It looked as though Malfoy had been standing on Goyle's shoulders. Standing over them with an expression of the uttermost fury on her face was Professor McGonagall. An unworthy trick, she was shouting, a low and cowardly attempt to sabotage the Gryffindor seeker. Detention for all of you. Oh, wait. I lost it. Oh, and 50 points from Slytherin. I shall be speaking to Professor Dumbledore about this, make no mistakes. Here he comes now. If anything could have set the seal on Gryffindor's victory, it was this. Ron, who had fought his way through Harry's side, doubled up with laughter as they watched Malfoy fighting to extricate himself from the rope. Goyle's head still stuck inside. Come on, Harry, said George, fighting his way over. Party. Gryffindor common room now. Right, said Harry, feeling happier than he had in ages. He and the rest of the team led the way, still in their scarlet robes, out of the stadium and back up to the castle. It felt as though they had already won the Quidditch Cup. The party went on all day and well into the night. Fred and George Weasley disappeared for a couple of hours and returned with armfuls of bottles of butterbeer, pumpkin fizz, and several bags full of honeydew sweets. How'd you do that? Squealed Angelina Johnson as George started throwing peppermint toads into the crowd. With a little help from Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, Fred muttered in Harry's ear. Only one person wasn't joining in the festivities. Hermione, incredibly, was sitting in the corner, attempting to read an enormous book entitled Home Life and Social Habits of a British Muggle. Harry broke away from the table where Fred and George had started juggling butterbeer bottles and went over to her. "Did you even come to the match?" he asked her. "Of course I did," said Hermione in a strangely high-pitched voice, now looking up. "And I'm very glad we won. I think you did really well, but I need to read this by Monday." "Come on, Hermione, come and have some food," said Harry, looking over at Ron and wondering whether he was in a good mood to bury the hatchet. "I can't, Harry. I've still got 422 pages to read," said Hermione, sounding slightly hysterical. "Anyway," she glanced over at Ron too, "he doesn't want me to join in." There was no arguing with this, as Ron chose that moment to say loudly, "If Scabbers hadn't just been eaten, he could have had some of those fudge flies. He used to really like them." Hermione burst into tears. Before Harry could say or do anything, she tucked the enormous book under her arm and, still sobbing, ran toward the staircases to the girls' dormitories and out of sight. "Can't you give her a break?" Harry asked Ron quietly. "No," said Ron flatly. "If she just acted like she was sorry, but she'll never admit she's wrong. She's still acting like Scabbers has gone on vacation or something." The Gryffindor party ended only when Professor McGonagall turned up in her tartan dressing gown and hairnet at 1 a.m. to insist they all go to bed. Harry and Ron climbed to the stairs to their dormitory, still discussing the match. At last, exhausted, Harry climbed into bed, twitched the hangings of his four-poster shut to block out ray of moonlight, lay back, and felt himself almost drifting off to sleep. He had a very strange dream. He was walking through a forest, his firebolt over his shoulder, following something silvery white. It was winding its way through the trees ahead, and he could only catch a glimpse of what's between the leaves. Anxious to catch up with it, he sped up, but as he moved faster, so did his quarry. Harry broke into a run, and ahead he heard hooves of gathering speed. He was now running flat out, and ahead he could still hear galloping. Then he turned a corner into a clearing, and no! Harry woke suddenly as he'd been hit in the face. Disoriented in total darkness, he fumbled with his hangings. He could hear movements around him. Seamus Finnegan's voice from the other side of the room. "What's going on?" Harry thought he heard the dormitory door slam. At last, finding the divide in his curtains, he ripped them back. And at the same moment, Dean Thomas lit his lamp. Ron was sitting up in the bed, the hanging torn from one side, a look of utmost terror on his face. "Black, Sirius Black, with a knife. What?" "Here, just now, slashed the curtains. Woke me up. You sure you weren't dreaming?" said Dean. "Look at the curtains. I tell you, he was here." They all scrambled out of bed. Harry reached the dormitory door first, and they sprinted back down the staircase. Doors opened behind them, and sleepy voices called after them. Who shouted, "What are you doing?" The common room was lit with the glow of dying fire, still littered with the debris from the party. It was deserted. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming, Ron?" "I'm telling you, I saw him." "What's all the noise?" "Professor McGonagall told us to go to bed." A few of the girls had come down the staircase, pulling on their dressing gowns and yawning. Boys, too, were reappearing. "Excellent. Are we carry on?" said Fred Weasley brightly. "Everyone back upstairs," said Percy, hurrying into the common room and pinning his head boy badge to his pajamas as he spoke. Sirius Black," said Ron faintly, "in our dormitory, with a knife. Woke me up." The common room went very still. "Nonsense," said Percy, looking startled. "You had too much to eat, Ron. You had a nightmare. I'm telling you. Now really, enough's enough." Professor McGonagall was back. She slammed the portrait behind her as she entered the common room and stared furiously around. "I am delighted that the Gryffindor won the match." But this is getting ridiculous. Percy, I expected better of you. I certainly didn't authorize this, Professor, said Percy, puffing himself up indignantly. I was just telling them that they all get back to bed. My brother Ron here had a nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare, Ron yelled. Professor, I woke up and Sirius Black was standing over me, holding a knife. Professor McGonagall stared at him. Don't be ridiculous, Weasley. How could it possibly have gone through the portrait hole? Ask him, said Ron, pointing a shaking finger at the back of Sir Cadogan pictures. Ask him if he saw. Glaring suspiciously at Ron, Professor McGonagall pushed the portrait roll back open and went outside. The whole common room listened with bated breath. Sir Cadogan, did you just let a man enter Gryffindor Tower? Certainly, good lady, cried Sir Cadogan. There was stunned silence, both inside and outside the common room. You did, said Professor McGonagall. But the password. He had them, said Sir Cadogan proudly. Had holes weeks, my lady. Write them off a little piece of paper. Professor McGonagall pulled herself back through the portrait hole to face the stunned crowd. She was white as chalk. Which person, she said, her voice shaken, which abysmally foolish person wrote down this week's passwords and left them lying around? There was utter silence, broken by the smallest of terrified squeaks. It was Neville Longbottom, trembling from head to fluffy slippered toes, raising his hand slowly into the air.